All right, welcome back to Wrestling Retold and Relived with Richie Mars. I, of course, am your fantastic, gracious host, Richie Mars, and I am here today to talk about the invasion. But I couldn't tackle this big, monumental topic alone. I had to call in backup. I had to call
Yeah.
not the third man, but the second man in here. I had to call my good friend Marcus. Marcus, how we doing
What's up?
today?
I'm good, man. I'm happy to be here. Me and you always talk little wrestling things. Like I'll find something on Instagram and I'll shoot it your way, or I'll see something that you've done. I'm like, yo, what about this? And it's it's funny because I personally, I know you're like you keep up. You're very much involved. I kind of fell off, and then somehow randomly found my way back. Um, so I've been kind of like looking up like top 10 videos and watching new matches and kind of going back and like doing my Googles and my history searches. So it's been fun.
That's good, man, and it's great to have you back in the fandom. But if you don't mind me asking, let's get a little Cliff Note version of your fandom, like when you started, when you fell off, and we found out how you got back. So you could tell us your journey, so to speak.
Sure. So I kind of came into it. Um, I would say late 90s. I was a big WCW guy. I loved the
Mm,
cruiserweight division. Like all those guys, Ray, Kidman, Juventud, Jericho. That was my jam. And it was interesting to me because WWE was all about the big guys. It was all about, that was the thing. Like, where do the big boys come? Where do the
yeah,
big boys play? Was WWE, which was fine because they had really good matches. But I was a big sucker for the cruiserweights. So I would watch them, and then slowly but surely, ECW got into syndication, and I started watching ECW, and I kept up with the WWE. And at one point, it was wrestling every day but Tuesday because that's when there was nothing on. Like you had the Monday Night Wars going on. Tuesday was nothing. I think Wednesday at one point was Thunder.
hmm
Thursday was SmackDown. Friday was ECW. Saturday was WCW Saturday night, and then Wednesday was WWE F at the time Heat.
hmm
So I was just like, this is great. And then everything down the line, of course, what we're talking about today got bought out and got kind of homogenized in one umbrella. And so I was watching probably till I want to say maybe like mid 2000s. Like I remember I kind of fell off, and it's ironic because I fell off maybe 6 months to a year right before they gave Ray the heavyweight title.
Oh, okay.
And Ray's always been my favorite since a kid. Like to this day, like Ray is one of my favorites. And it's funny that the like when I stop watching is when he wins. So it was like a weird, no pun intended, twist of fate that I'm just like, it's kind of stale, and like my favorite guy gets the strap. I'm just like,
Yeah, sometimes that happens because I remember, like I was watching WWE. This was like 2011, and I was just kind of like tired of the same old product. I was like, you know what? It's like I'm gonna turn off Raw. Like I can't like do this anymore. Or of course, that's the Raw where CM Punk like drops the pipe bomb promo, as they call it, and I'm just like,
nice.
I'm like, all right, now now I have to watch everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But yeah, I actually saw Rey Mysterio win the world title in the audience for his second time. Like he was in the
nice.
Nassau Coliseum, so it was
Okay.
pretty cool seeing because Rey was always one of my favorites too. But I joined as a WWE fan when they already bought out everything. I came in around 2003, so I
Mm,
didn't even know about these other promotions until they started dropping DVDs of ECW and WCW because they bought the libraries by then.
yeah.
And just to pedal back a little bit, when you saw that WCW was bought out, or when you heard that it was bought out and no longer running, was that like a significant blow to your fandom overall, because WCW and WWE both had different presentation styles, and now it's all under the umbrella of WWE?
When they got bought out, I was more so just kind of, I was still young, like I was in middle school. And I remember specifically a friend of mine at the time, shout out to Brad Lane, wherever you are, I hope you're doing well. He was the one that told me. So I don't know how the heck he knew, but he was just like, nah, dude, like tonight, WWE, they bought them. And I was like, what do you mean they bought? He's like, no, no, no. Like they bought WCW and ECW. And then it was literally that night I'm watching Nitro, and then the whole thing happens, and I was like, so who is this man's information plug? Because we're 13, like 12, 13. I'm like, how does this guy know? Like, does he have insider information somewhere? Is he at OVW or somewhere? Is he gonna get called up to the roster soon?
Brad
Um,
Lane was a secret insider all along, and he's just writing his
yeah, like
newsletter. He created the
yeah,
dirt sheets, maybe.
he could have been like him and Dave Meltzer were out here just doing stuff. He probably had a line of Bruce Pritchard or someone. He
Yeah,
knew someone.
yeah.
Wherever you are, Brad, you knew someone.
So yeah, once that all happens, and now WWE is now this giant wrestling conglomerate monopoly, whatever you want to call it, and the plans were sort of in motion for that WCW invasion, because you had a lot of people who wanted that dream match card of promotion versus promotion.
Hmm.
It's kind of like today, if you're a UFC fan or a Bellator fan and you see your favorites there, you want to see how they do in the either quote unquote big leagues or what have
Yeah.
you. But with WCW, there was such a rich history involved where it's just kind of like it turned away a certain demographic of wrestling fans because they don't like the
Hmm.
whole glitz and glam of WWE. But now
Hmm.
we have all of this talent, we have all of this copyrights that we can use on our program, being WWE, that we could kind of tell the story our way, if that makes any
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah.
And when a funny thing is, originally WCW were going to make their debut at WrestleMania 17. And when that happened, they were supposed to be an integral part of the finish between the Vince McMahon Shane McMahon match, because Shane bought WCW the Raw before.
Okay.
So what happened was, some WCW stars were talking to like media and stuff like that, hyping up the show.
Yeah. I was brushing up. It was Sean Stasiak.
Yeah, he Sean Stasiak just said, "Oh yeah, I think we're just gonna interfere tonight," and then they like kibosh the whole thing because he like spoiled everything.
Yeah. That's. I literally was like, so right before you and I kind of established everything, I was like, let me brush up on some stuff. And yeah, they said it was Stasiak that kind of spilled the beans. That's why they did the whole them just chilling in the suite thing,
Hmm.
like watching it because he had said something. So it's again one of the great what ifs of the angle. If he didn't blurb, like, would we had the run in?
Hmm. And not only that, after that, Sean Stasiak's character proposed that. It was just they made him into
Uh,
a. They didn't make him into meat like he was before in WWE. He was just a
yeah,
meathead. Like he would just like run and then just smack into walls as people are just walking and brushing around the side. And Jr. is like, "Oh, what an idiot," and then
yeah, the whole like Planet Stasiak thing, and
yeah,
uh,
he's doing well as a chiropractor now.
I hope so. I mean,
So,
yeah, like what could have been?
yeah, and let's talk about the initial talent that came in from WCW to WWE, because
Hmm.
unlike other wrestling promotions where they're independent, WCW was a part of Turner Networking, and they
Yes.
went out of business due
Yep.
to the AOL Time War, like Turner merger, and uh, uh, JC Kellner didn't want wrestling on their programming. And
Hmm.
so when you had like the big stars like Kevin Nash, Hogan, Scott Hall, Rey Mysterio, they all had these contracts not with WCW but with Turner.
Yeah, the AOL Time Warner contracts.
Yeah, so you could go to WWE, but if you're making X amount of money from Turner, like Kevin Nash, I think he had like a couple million a year. Why would you take the buyout and probably make less money than you would just going on the road like 6 nights a week? You know, so
Yeah,
a lot of
I
them
mean,
just sat at home and took the money.
yeah, like why not? And there were two specific ones that I didn't know that had contracts that decided not to because they wanted to be part of the angles,
Mhm.
and that was Booker and DDP.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, that's a very good point. Like if I'm getting paid millions a year, why am I going to be on the road? What, like 48 weeks out of the year? Like you said, six nights a week. Um, there's televised matches, there's dark matches, all that stuff. Why am I going to do that when I can just have a nice little umbrella drink with my toes out, you know, walk to the mailbox, ooh, another check. All right, like I'm going to go race go-karts or something right now because I can do that. Like I have that. Not to mention, I'm pretty sure if they're defunct, then licensing wise, couldn't they still go out and like do appearances and do little gigs here and there?
Uh, I believe so, because those contracts that they signed were, I believe, television contracts. You
Okay.
know, so it's like you can't show up on TV. But hypothetically, if there was a convention, like I assume you would show up. But the thing back then in 2001, I don't think the convention scene was as popping as it is. You know, with the Comic
Ah,
Cons and everything.
yeah,
So you
true.
could probably still do appearances for money, but
Yeah.
uh, I think the only like legal holdup with those contracts is like you just clear it with Turner or like the
Mhm.
LL people, and then they would just kind of thrust you in there. But
Yeah.
it's funny you say DDP, one of the guys who bought out the contract. Allegedly, he took a buyout of 50 cents to come to WWE.
I mean, it kind of shows in the storyline, so it makes sense.
Whoa, whoa,
If
whoa,
you...
we'll get to that storyline. Oh, we will. But the initial plan for the WCW product or invasion when they first went over to WWE was that the creative was Vince McMahon. If you remember the angle where Tori Wilson seduced him and then Linda McMahon threatened him with
yeah.
divorce, the original plan was that Linda's divorce would have one of Vince's assets, which would be Monday Night Raw, which she would
Yeah.
then give to Shane McMahon to make WCW Nitro on Mondays. So they could get more
Mhm.
established talent, all the WCW guys that they signed, which were more of the mid to lower card guys, with a couple exceptions like the Booker T's and the DDPs, and try to develop them that way before they have this whole invasion come to a climax, because you're still waiting out time for all these guys to buy out of their contracts, or their contracts to run out from Turner Time Warner, like Goldberg, Kevin Nash, Hogan, etc. Problem was, Booker T and Buff Bagwell had a
Oh yeah, had the
very big
ugh.
doozy of a match, and not in a good way.
Yeah,
Like
that stunk up the joint.
it was so bad. Like the crowd turned on it. Kurt Angle and Steve Austin finally like threw Buff Bagwell out of there, never to be seen on WWE TV again.
Mm,
Buff was not the stuff then,
no.
but apparently he's back in like the Indies, and he's doing Mr. Bagwell character where it's like he's like a Mr. Rogers kind of guy.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, but
All
apparently
right.
it's like Buff's had some like well known struggles, and I hear he's doing better now. So congrats
Okay.
to
Well,
Mr.
yeah,
Bagwell.
good
You
for
know,
him.
good for him.
Yeah.
But apparently he was let go. They had all the WCW guys go to Connecticut to work out in the rings because the ring sizes were different in WCW to WWE, and
Mhm.
they had to decide like how are they going to work. And apparently Shane Helms, the Hurricane,
Yeah.
and Buff Bagwell got into like a little tizzy, and apparently Hurricane had like one of those little like water bottles that were frozen, and
Hmm.
like threw at Bagwell in his head and just like split open. And after that, Buff Bagwell, and this is how Jim Ross tells the story. He had his mother call the office saying he couldn't make the house show or the live event that day.
Um. Okay. Question: was she calling from the pole or was she on the ground?
I think it was the poll.
Ah,
Yeah.
better reception
Yeah,
probably.
it's like
Uh,
you gotta be on that forklift in order to get that reception, to Stanford when you're down in Atlanta.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But it's now that I'm thinking about it, given that his name was the Hurricane, like coming into things, how is that not like more of a joke or a rib? Because it could have been called like the hailstorm or something, because it's frozen ice.
So the funny thing about Hurricane is Shane Helms came up with the gimmick because originally he was Sugar Shane Helms in
Yeah,
WCW,
I remember that.
and they said he couldn't be Shane Helms because Shane McMahon, you can't have your
Mm-hmm.
first name. They thought Helms sounded too much like Helmsley,
Okay.
which is like Triple H, Hunter Hearst
Yep,
Helmsley,
Hunter Hearst Helmsley.
and he couldn't do the vertebraker because Vince was horrified of that move,
Yes, that was one of the band's moves.
and so they took away, and he couldn't use his entrance song because it was the vertebraker. So
That's right, because
they
it's like the first thing that happens. It's
so
like,
they took away
yeah.
his entrance music, the Sugar Babies, which were his backup dancers, the his name, everything. So he had to start from ground zero, and he
Hmm.
had a Green Lantern tattoo, and he did a segment with Steve Austin, and like Steve Austin said, "What's that tattoo?" It's like Green Lantern. It's like, well, it's like, who's Green Lantern? It's like, oh, he could knock out Superman one punch, bam, and then that was the segment. And then he decided to become the Hurricane because Stone Cold Steve Austin christened him as the Hurricane.
Yeah, I remember when they were in the ring, and I think it was like right around Austin's heel turn, and he gave him the Green Lantern shirt, and he was just like, this is one of my heroes, and Austin just kind of was like, okay, cool, like,
It's the epitome of like you invite the strange kid to your birthday, and he gives you like something that he likes instead of you,
yeah,
but you have to be like, oh yeah, thanks, that's good.
yeah, and it's like it's just like a whole like 3 pound jar of like barbecue peanuts, and you're like, oh, that's great, thanks, bud, and your mom's just like, no, you be nice, say thank you, like, who's gonna eat all of these? Like, dump them in the yard, give them to the squirrels.
Yeah, so we got a lot of different takes on the invasion over the years, mostly because everyone says it's a failed to live up to the height, and that's being an understatement because we didn't have the big
Hmm.
names like a Kevin Nash, Hulk Hogan, Goldberg, all those guys who's eventually came to WWE anyway because they were
Hmm.
the only game in town. So, in hindsight, and of course everything hindsight's 2020.
Of course.
Yep. When would be the appropriate time to do the invasion? And if you had control of the company, it's Marcus World Wrestling Federation. Uh, when would you pull the trigger on the invasion? Would you let this cook for a little bit in 2001? Would you do the idea to make Monday Night Raw WCW, or would you kind of like integrate like the talent that they had? Like, what would you do?
You made a very good point. First off, um, that they did not have a lot of the top guys. So, with that being said, maybe kind of make it its own thing. Like, because from my understanding, looking at the timeline, um, if you look at the Monday Night Wars and both companies as a whole, you have years and years and years, almost like decades worth of lore between them, and then the invasion angle was kind of done in like half a year.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine you have all of this stuff going on, and it's like, finally, we might not have everybody, but we can do this now, and it's done within half a year. um I would say to me now, I originally didn't know this, and I was kind of like doing some research. They tried to get WCW back into TV syndication, and nobody wanted to touch it because of how bad the product was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think even if they could have gotten like a small offshoot network, because we've seen it, time and time again, where one network that nobody really watches wrestling or really has anything to do with action gets a syndication right, and they kind of they can use that to build that up. Like, remember, what was it, Sci-Fi had rights for, was that SmackDown?
Uh, let's see. Sci-Fi had SmackDown at one point. I think it also had ECW at one point.
Yeah, and it's just like, yeah, like stuff like that. It's just, why not use that as an incubator to build momentum? And like we said before, you don't have a lot of the top guys. Okay, that's fine, and that is part of the detriment right there. However, you still have a lengthy mid card roster. You still have a lengthy lower card roster, so some of those guys can get bumped up.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the people that you didn't expect could definitely surprise you if given a shot, because we all know that every once in a while you have somebody where they get a match, or they get a they get a promo, and then out of nowhere they have momentum.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would have been smart to maybe let it get its footing first, because if you can let it get its footing as a separate faction, even though you might not have the top guys, you can start to cultivate and make, for lack of a better word, you can move guys up, and you can also start to make more homegrown talent, because
Mm-hmm.
if you have your own platform, you could bring guys up, and maybe kind of like how NXT is a little bit of the developmental show. Maybe that could have been like the first inkling of that. Like, don't
Right.
I
Yeah,
think it
I
was
know what
kind
you're
of
saying. Yeah.
yeah, I think it was kind of foolish to just scrap it as a whole, because you have this whole thing, and you alluded to before, WCW and WWF at the time were two extremely different products.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than bury one, why not keep the more kind of, not, I don't want to say wholesome, but like, obviously with the attitude era going on, things were going crazy, but the less like drug, sex, rock and roll kind of thing.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, exactly. Because a lot of that, where it's just like, oh, we just have the name now. Let's just slap it on these talents, and hopefully it kind of like takes on a life of its own. Because we saw within the invasion, a lot of people were switching from Team WWF to WCW just to kind of make up for the lost time of not having the top names there, and they were using their own talent to bolster the WCW name. One of those
Hmm.
talents being Steve Austin, who
Yeah.
arguably was the biggest star in the company. And at WrestleMania 17, he turns heel. And as the story goes, that's where business took a dramatic downturn, because Steve Austin, when he turned heel, a lot of people thought that was the jump the shark moment for them when he shook hands with Vince McMahon during that night, the same night that WCW appeared. So it's one of those things where Steve before was so outright. I'm not sure if he was on television, but I know like he had a bunch of like VHSs and DVDs at the time saying that uh, he didn't like WCW because Eric Bischoff didn't see like there's no good way to market Steve Austin, Stunning Steve. And
Hmm.
then Steve Austin left, went to ECW, went to WWE, and then made his name there. So it was just kind of a weird thing to buy that Steve Austin would all of a sudden like join WCW, even though in storyline it's to stick one to Vince McMahon, but it's like it's still, it was, I feel like the invasion was a big jumping the shark moment for a lot of wrestling fans in general, because you have this like dream card where it's like you have Steve Austin, you have uh this top guy, but now he's heel, and the only person that, or the only two people that could go against him, because Steve Austin already faced Undertaker that spring. The Rock was off doing Scorpion King, and Triple H just got hurt. So you really
Hmm.
didn't have many top guys to begin with to pull off this invasion. But now it's like you're gonna have Rock coming back not till later. You have almost no choice but to, like you said, to push up those guys who are in the mid card, like Kurt Angle, like Chris Jericho. But there needs to be a proper build, and I feel like there was like a fast forward on a lot of those guys and a lot of those programs. And with the influx of talent that's coming in, you know, you could have some stars who were hesitant because now your roster size is doubled. So now the opportunities that might have been thin to begin with are now being more bolstered in the sea. So definitely like a brand separation would have been helpful at that time. And I guess we could thank Buff Bagwell for the brand split in general for Raw and SmackDown that we see today. But
Yeah.
we're going into the invasion, and now we're going to talk about how ECW then got into the invasion. So ECW was the distant third company between WWE, WCW, and ECW. And ECW was kind of almost like a feeder system to WWE, but unofficially, because you had a
Yeah.
lot of
Like
talent.
they would.
Dudley's. There was the famous story where the Dudleys asked for $1 raise more to stay in ECW, and Paul said, "No, I can't match it." And then they're like, "Okay, so they're just a feeder system from now on." And there were some
Hmm.
talent exchanges, like Too Cold Scorpio, and then like Al Snow went to WWE through ECW, and then WWE
Hmm.
would like send talent down to ECW to get some more seasoning, like Brackus, if you remember him, Furnace and LaFon, like all those different talents. So ECW was bankrupted in January 2001, I believe. The problem was with the ECW invasion, even though they got stars like Tommy Dreamer and RVD to WWE, and then you had other WCW stars like Lance Storm, Mike Awesome joined the team ECW. The problem was the properties of ECW weren't available from bankruptcy court,
Yeah.
so they couldn't use the name ECW. So they thought the best way to do it was to combine WCW and ECW, and then they are the Alliance.
Yeah. 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 Um. Again, they it, almost kind of going back to what you said. Putting this influx of talent made people panic, sure, because everybody's vying for TV time. Everybody, if you get a good match, you might be able to kind of get a solid angle, or you know, there's pay-per-views floating about, so everybody's trying to figure out when and how they can get their name in the pay-per-views. Um, again, with ECW, you have a solid roster. Um, given the invasion in and of itself was an interesting concept because you have these two outsiders, and it's almost kind of like two Davids versus one Goliath, but you're all under the same roof. So how do you navigate that? Because even if you have two Davids, who's slinging the rock and who's getting the glory?
Hmm. Yeah, it just seemed kind of
Um,
like they were trying to make their own, like for lack of a better term, revisionist history concerning WCW and ECW. And
mm-hmm,
Paul Heyman had that great work shoot promo on Vince McMahon the night before Survivor Series, where he went on a tangent about how Vince liked sports entertainment and he stole a bunch of his ideas from the Attitude Era from ECW, which to a
mm-hmm.
degree was really accurate, because you had Sandman before you had Stone Cold. You had
Yes.
you had all these guys who had some really boundary pushing gimmicks that really did change the course of wrestling at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then once everything kind of became WWE wise, it was almost became sanitized to fit the WWE mold, even though they weren't in the PG product that we know them today. it was still kind of a toned down version of what WCW and ECW were, just for the factors we just mentioned, the lack of talent, the lack of time dedication, because the storyline later turned into Vince versus his kids.
Again, yeah, which it always is, and it's just like, all right, we get it. Like you're fighting. Now
Yeah.
what?
And then like the kicker is like Vince was a babyface the whole time, which at that time was a very stark contrast to what he was doing beforehand. And then it shows that it wasn't the best idea because he turned heel the next night anyway. So the whole thing
Mm-hmm.
was kind of moot. And then you had Ric Flair come in after the invasion ended. And then you're like, okay, are we still doing the invasion? Because he's part owner, but it was just a lot to follow. And if you're the casual fan or if you're the diehard fan and now you're seeing Ric Flair come in after the invasion, I know we're skipping ahead a lot, but when
Mm-hmm.
you have one of the most synonymous names with that company just appear after that storyline, it almost seems like, okay, this is where the invasion should have began, with Ric Flair
Yeah.
coming in.
Well, that's also like really interesting. And if you look at the timeline, again, a lot of the guys have the Time Warner AOL contracts. Um, but it wasn't that long until they all started to crop up anyway.
Hmm.
So if you would have let this like fester again from the mid card guys to the lower card guys and kind of cultivated and let it grow, all the talent was coming there anyway.
Hmm.
Because what other game is there in town? You have little indie shows, sure, but you have guys that some of them, some of them are workers, some
Hmm.
of them are in it for the money, sure, some of them want the TV time, and some of them, you have people that just like to go do and don't want to be home.
Hmm.
So if you wait and you get some angles and you get some solid booking, one by one they're showing up anyway.
Exactly. And just to paint a picture of the people that came in after the invasion came up. So we mentioned Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan came in, Scott Hall came in,
Mhm.
Kevin Nash came in, Rey Mysterio came in.
Mhm.
All these guys who are synonymous with WCW came in within a year of the invasion starting.
Yeah.
Like they came in 2002, but it was like it was still within that year that WCW was bought out by WWE. So
Mhm.
if you had the patience to execute it right, I think
Mhm.
what WWE their most concern was, I think they wanted to, and this is my conspiracy theorist hat coming on. I think they just wanted to push to the side the WCW name, and for I don't think ECW they were that bothered by, but they want to shove that all to the side to show we are the only game in town now. So this is what wrestling is now.
Yeah, and that's not even like tinfoil hat territory. If you look at the booking,
Mm.
that's literally what they did. Like the majority of your WCW, ECW guys, they got buried.
Yeah.
They got buried. They had stupid promos. There was horrible angles, and then like every. It's funny if you watch any interview with anybody that was like a WWE associate, they kind of skirt that like
Hmm.
heavy, and it's just like really like you had solid guys. You had Taz, you had RVD, who ended up being a breakout star, but you
Hmm.
had like guys that were like, let's say like a Lance Storm. Now people gave Lance Storm crap and said that he was boring, but Lance Storm could put on a good match. You
Uh,
have people that are good workers.
yeah, and his later
You
WCW stuff was great.
Yeah, like somebody like okay. So I was thinking about this. Right, this was a literal shower thought because I was in the shower thinking about this. Somebody like okay, Dean Malenko, for example.
Hmm.
Everybody said that Dean was great in the ring, horrible in the sticks. Okay, fair. However, you have Heyman now, and this was before like anybody was quote unquote like a big Heyman guy.
Hmm.
But you have Heyman who is great at like doing promos, great character work. Why not saddle him with some of these guys that are not necessarily the best talkers, but great workers?
Hmm.
Because it's like you have, it's almost kind of like if you have ingredients and you don't season them, of course your burger's going to be bland.
Hmm.
But if you went, you got the wagyu, the A1,
Yeah, yeah.
whatever it's called, but you don't season it or you don't cure it the way it's supposed to be cured, it's going to be garbage.
Hmm. And let's talk about those terrible storylines within the WWF versus WCW, ECW conglomerate. We alluded to it earlier.
Yeah.
It's the Undertaker DDP storyline,
Oh god. Yes.
and this is what happened here, folks. If you guys heard about it or haven't heard about it, we're just I'm just gonna give the cliff notes. So DDP, who was the People's Champion in WCW, Mr. WCW, if there was a modern face of WCW, that would be DDP.
Mhm.
So for weeks and weeks, someone was stalking the Undertaker's wife at the time, Sarah. And fun fact, the people who, that deep voice who was like stalking her, that was actually Vince McMahon's voice. He did the
Mm,
voiceovers for that.
mm.
So there was this guy in a trench coat, had a ski mask on. It was in Raw. And then he unmasks, and it's DDP. And I'm not criticizing anyone's looks because we're far above that right now. Uh, but DDP was well known with his wife, Kimberly, at that time.
Mhm.
So it really didn't make sense for him to be a stalker to Undertaker's wife or anybody for that matter. And then you had like segments like he had a shrine to Sarah, and DDP was like, "Make me famous, dead man." And then it came to King of the Ring, where Undertaker just kept punching DDP over and over across the arena until DDP left. And this angle was drawn out until the Brothers of Destruction defeated DDP and Canyon at SummerSlam for the tag titles, and then on the next night in Raw, Sarah defeated DDP in a match.
Yeah.
So, but the match was right there: People's Champion DDP versus People's Champion The Rock.
Absolutely.
It was right there in front of them, and they didn't do it, which was very disappointing.
Ego.
Hmm. That's exactly what it was. Apparently, I read Ric Flair's book, and he said there was a story where DDP was just hugging Vince McMahon, and Vince McMahon was like, "Wow, why is he hugging me? That's weird." And I'm just like, can we stop like roasting DDP?
Yeah. Yeah. It was like you said. You had People's Champ versus People's Champ. You could have did one faction's heel versus another faction's face. You could have had like the faces team up against the heels. Like there was so many good angles. Not to mention you had ECW come in,
Hmm.
and then you got guys. You got Tommy Dreamer, you got Taz, you got RVD. I think Just Incredible was with them,
Yeah.
and you had Rhino with them. You had Heyman again, and it's like you could have like now how they have like SmackDown, Raw, NXT. It could have been WCW, ECW, WWE.
Hmm.
Like, why not make them their their own things? And I understand there is like corporate tape and there's hoops and all that stuff, but like you have solid guys, you have solid performers, you have solid angles, and then again, just buried. Like,
Yeah, just making them look like chumps when in actuality, the only person that looked fine post invasion, in my opinion, was RVD because he was
absolutely.
so popular that people enjoyed him so much. He even got like a WWE championship match out of it. And a lot of people said that he should have won the title that night against Steve Austin and Kurt Angle at No Mercy.
Mm-hmm.
And that might have been a little bit too soon, but it's like if you look at look and hear his reactions during that time. Like he was a part of the quote unquote biggest bad guy faction in wrestling history at that time that they were trying to bolster, and he was the most popular guy on the show.
Yeah, like he was a breath of fresh air. He wasn't a big guy. He could move in and out the ring. He had, a solid offense. He had a very interesting defense. It was almost kind of like he was like part striker, part luchador.
Yes,
And
yes.
you have to think like WWE wasn't known for luchadors. They weren't known for like high flying. They weren't known for flashiness. It, I mean, you had guys that could do it, sure, but it was a breath of fresh air because you didn't like if you look at their roster, and let's say you had a 3-on-3 with a cruiserweight division. Let's go like Psychosis, Ray, Juventud, right? Who energy wise do you have at that time that could really like put on a good match?
Yeah, it would be tough to say. I think the closest to that would probably be Jeff Hardy at that time, and they
Yeah,
actually did
you
pull
got the
off that.
Hardy Boys.
Yeah, and they pulled off that. I think that was the only dream match that they really did during the entire Invasion angle was that Jeff Hardy
Exactly.
Rob Van Dam match at Invasion,
Mhm.
and that Invasion pay per view. It's funny to mention that Invasion pay per view at that time was one of the highest grossing pay per views in company history, just on the
Yeah,
name alone, and that's including some WrestleManias, some like surpassed Royal
absolutely.
Rumbles, SummerSlams, all these
Yep.
other big WWE shows. But the Invasion grossed all that money, and they only had a fraction of the big names they got. So hypothetically, if they even had like those names at that time, how much more money could they made during
Mhm.
that time? So it's like one of those things where I think it was almost an instant regret with that whole Invasion pay per view because that's when Steve Austin jumped, and then the angle became more about Steve Austin and friends, and maybe Booker T, maybe Rob Van Dam, but it's like Steve Austin, the McMahons, Heyman. Those were like the top stars of the entire Invasion angle. And then you had stars from WWE always jumping from from WWE to the Alliance. Like I think Christian did. I think Test did. And like all these guys jumped to the other side,
Mhm.
and it just didn't make sense. It kind of watered down their feuds in a way
Yeah.
because like Christian and Edge, people wanted to see that breakup for a while if you were invested in the team, Edge and Christian, but it seemed like they were bogged down with the whole invasion angle, so Christian had to jump ship because that was the heel thing to do.
Yeah.
And that was the weird because they tried to do it where it's like people were heel on some teams, but it's like they were babyface. It just seemed like a very big mess, and it didn't help that there are like 10 or 8 different belts floating around at the time, and then when you have so many
Mhm.
floating around at the time, they kind of become props, and then it becomes a little bit over derivative, you know what I mean? Which is why they had all those
Mhm.
unification matches at that Survivor Series. Did the abundance of championship belts bother you?
It didn't bother me, but I could see why people would be turned off because if you're telling me that, this is the thing we're fighting for, this is what everybody wants, these are why, this is what the blood, sweat, and tears is for, people are putting their lives on the line for this, and now you have more of them, it kind of makes it lose its luster a little bit.
Hmm.
That's almost kind of like, if to kind of switch gears and compared to something else. Like you have people that are big like fashion people, right? And let's
Hmm.
say there's a jacket that is, you know, X amount are made, and then 5 years down the line, they do a retro of the jacket and kind of put it back out again. That original jacket that everybody coveted, everyone's like, well, I can just get the retro now.
Hmm.
So it kind of it kind of like loses a little bit of the shine.
Hmm.
And I get it. Like I understand it. Like it didn't bother me because I wanted to see the matches. I wanted to see how this was gonna play out because again, going into it, while I watched all of them, I was a big WCW guy. Before the waters got super muddied. But yeah, I could absolutely see like why people were just kind of like, all right, like there's all these belts. That's great. Who
Hmm.
cares?
And there was a title change every other week, it seemed like.
Mhm.
And which brings us to present day when you have AEW. I like AEW, but every week there would be a championship match on all three of their programming, and then they have these quarterly specials like Clash of the Champions called Battle of the Belts.
Mhm.
And I know Warner asked for those specials, but I'm like, why do we have Battle of the Belts if we're gonna get championship matches on the main shows anyway? So what makes this show special? And that's what kind of the championship titles means after a while. If you kind of abuse their drawing power to a certain degree, and it becomes a point where the guy holding the championship makes the championship more valuable, other than the championship trying to elevate that person up. And we saw it with the invasion with RVD and the hardcore title. You know, he really did make that championship his own and very special and coveted at that time. The Intercontinental Championship during that time really elevated Edge, even though it switched between person to person a lot. Uh, yeah, it was just one of those things where they were used to drive the story of the invasion rather than elevate the person carrying it or the person
Mhm.
having the ability to elevate that championship, because they didn't have enough time to actually make them mean something.
Yeah, and it's like the old phrase. It's like, um, it's something along the lines of like, if everybody is special, then nobody is special.
Hmm.
It's like if you know that there's a queue of people standing in line for the strap, what's it matter?
Hmm.
Like, you know, this person's gonna get it for a month. They're gonna have two, three title defenses, and then it's the next person. So they're not even giving time for the storylines to build up. There's no rivalries. There's no interesting matches. There's nothing to it because while it is action based, sure. What a lot of people don't see it as this, but I do. It's theater in a sense. You're not letting the story fester. You're not letting the drama happen. You're not giving people a reason to be involved.
Hmm.
It would almost kind of be like if you watched a play and you saw the beginning of it and then like the next scene was the end of it. It's just like, all right, so we went in this cave, we found this monster. Okay, we beat it. But they don't show you how they beat it. They don't show you the intricacies of figuring out what to do in the situation. You know, who stepped up, who fell off, all that stuff. It has no bite to it. It has no meat.
Hmm. Especially with this feud being WCW, ECW trying to take over WWE. But what does that mean for the WWE fan itself? They were just saying, "Oh, it will be bad if they took over." Why would it be bad if they took over? Like, I understand it's your company. It's like WWE has history and history and history, but you're not giving me the reason. It's like, what are they going to do that's different? Is it just like
Yeah.
the name and branding is going to be the same?
Mhm.
You know, and we just had a merger with WWE and UFC to make TKO Sports. So, and WWE seems to be fine like that. So back then, it just seemed like, again, let's just do it just to do it, and then we don't need to mention WCW, ECW ever again until we sell
Yeah.
DVDs from the tape library that we get later down the line.
It was very much uh the phrase is show don't tell, but they did it in reverse. They said
Hmm.
tell don't show.
Yeah.
These guys are bad, so we're gonna win.
Hmm.
But it's just like, why are these guys bad? Like, let's say you have some of the guys that are the mid carders coming up, forming a stable, and taking out all the lower cards on the other faction.
Hmm.
Now we have something to bite on because essentially you have like the schoolyard bully picking on the little guy.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that you guys are little, but it could also work in the opposite. Like let's say they are picking on the lower carders. That kind of gives a chance to give them a little bit of a rub. Maybe they go into it like Survivor Series, kind of like this faction versus that faction, and obviously not job everybody out, but have really good matches.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have so many different ingredients here, and it's almost kind of like you looked at it and you said, "Ah, like I don't need any of the spices. I don't need any of the the intangibles. I'm not gonna brine this thing. I'll throw everything in the trash, and I'm just gonna cook this until whatever meat you enjoy is just tough, and it's like a hockey puck because it's
It's
mine
like
and I
that
can do it."
it's like that SpongeBob episode when Mr. Krabs was making the appetizer and then it comes alive a little bit and just starts just destroying everything like in sight. And so it just became one of those things where it's like we're gonna grow this issue because everyone knows about the fight between WWE and WCW.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, if you're a casual fan of WWE and you didn't know about WCW, or vice versa, and you just wanted to watch your product and you wanted to see like a great crossover episode of the show, and instead
Mhm.
it became if a crossover episode only featured a couple cameos from different stars from the past, like if you remember those CW superhero shows like Arrow, Flash, Legends of
Yeah.
Tomorrow, like they would have like their yearly crossover, and some
Mhm.
of them were good, but others are just kind of like, oh cool, we got Kevin Conroy to play Batman, but he's an evil Batman who kills people. I'm like, all right, I didn't really ask for that. Like, it's cool to see Kevin Conroy. I just don't think that really makes any sense.
Yeah. And it's just like, all right, going with your Batman analogy, if you watch Justice League Flashpoint, there is like the evil Batman, and I don't want to give too much of the story away because it's a really good story.
It is a good
But there
story.
is like not necessarily like an evil Batman, but he's like a more gritty. I'll I will kill if I need to.
Hmm.
But again, with the cameos, you could have even like done it like that. Like let's say you had while you're secretly developing one product, you have cameos of the other wrestlers because I mean wrestling is its own ecosystem, and wrestlers watch wrestlers.
Hmm.
Wrestlers look at other products all the time. They inspect it. They want to see what's going on. They want to see, how can we do what they do, but how can we do it better? And I mean, you've seen it time and time again. Um, but why not have like little cameos of just like, oh, this person's in the audience. What's he doing here?
Yeah, like a
And
Booker
like,
T, like, oh, that's the WCW champion. What's he doing watching this match between Kurt Angle and Steve Austin? You know what I mean? Like, just
exactly.
scouting.
Yeah, like imagine not even in the front row. Like imagine if they like pan over and he's middle of the crowd and he's just sitting there like watching the match.
Yeah.
Maybe enjoying a drink, has his belt because everybody. And it would be one of those things where like it's a blink and you miss it moment, but it's a very good moment because I mean you've been to shows, I've been to shows. People will dress up, they'll have
Hmm.
masks, and they've done that before. Like I remember the one match. Uh, Hardcore Holly was dressed up like Rey Mysterio in the front
Yes,
row,
yes, yes, yes.
and you didn't know until the very end he had his mask on the entire time. So he
Hmm.
literally watched the entire show, then jumped the barricade to help out at the very end. So why not do these little things to entice people? Why not make these little Easter eggs? Because it could have been like, while they're having these little aha moments, they could have did that to build up like the WCW roster, and
Hmm.
then they start appearing more, and they start interfering, and it's just like rather than just dump it all at once, like
Yeah, exactly.
create the thread.
Yeah, and like what WWE is doing now with CM Punk is kind of like what I wanted them to do with the WCW guys, because what
Hmm.
they're doing with CM Punk now, he's coming back, and a lot of people aren't really trusting him because of his
Yeah.
perceived like backstage issues, which I'm not going to get into here because it's been talked about to death. And besides, I'm not backstage. I don't know what goes on.
Yeah.
And but the people's reactions to Punk being there, there was a interaction between him and Kevin Owens, and Punk's like, "Do you know where Nick Aldis's office is?" And Kevin Owens just laughs and he's like, "No," and then he just walks away. That's all you need. Like, let's say Booker T's in that situation coming from WCW. He's like,
Hmm.
yeah, it's like you see where Mr. McMahon is, like our office, and everyone's just kind of like giving him the stink eye, like what's the WCW champion doing here? Just add some more intrigue or more story with that. And I think during that time of the Attitude Era, post Attitude Era, there was a lot of, okay, how do we transition from the Attitude Era into a more different WWE product? Because they realized Rock's not going to be here forever. Steve
Hmm.
Austin's not going to be here forever. Taker's
Hmm.
probably not going to be here forever. So how do we move forward? And I think at that time, creatively, it was just throwing something at the wall and seeing what stuck. And the
Yeah.
invasion was unfortunately a byproduct of that and trying to recapture fan interest, but unfortunately, it did the opposite in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And it put a bad taste in people's mouths. And like you said, use these characters to kind of raise some eyebrows. It's almost kind of like, the Metal Gear, like, huh? What's this? And you see like the
Yeah.
little expression
Exclamation point.
above.
Yeah.
Yeah, like think about in that time in WCW, Ray had lost his mask. He was running around with the filthy animals, and he's still having a pretty solid run. But coming back, the company, he's wearing his mask again. Think about, like, let's say, and Ray was always a big baby face.
Hmm.
Let's say one of the heels that WWE has out of nowhere just finds, like, he's going through his gear, he's getting ready, and he finds a Rey Mysterio mask.
Mm.
Like, think about that. Think about
That
all of
that's pretty
the
that's pretty neat. Yeah.
yeah. Like, think about all the wait, because Ray wasn't on TV. He was one of those guys that like sat out, but to kind of build a bit of a buzz. And again, most people watched both products, so like, yeah, what's a Rey Mysterio mask doing here?
Hmm.
Or I mean, the big thing, DX versus NWO,
Hmm.
right? You could have worked that in. You could have, somebody finds like NWO merch in the locker room, but there's no sign of the outsiders. There's no Hogan, there's no Nash, there's no Hall.
Hmm.
So how did this get here?
Yeah, someone like a someone's in a hardcore match and like you see like the black baseball bat and then you're like what? And
Yeah.
then you see like Sting watching from like a rafter or just like from a different part of the arena. It's just like or a guy dressed as Sting. You could play it a lot of things like WWF could have been so paranoid that it's like, why are we seeing all these WCW guys? And then play off that paranoia and then finally build something to it. Because in a lot of ensemble movies, like we've seen with Avengers or ensemble casts like Degrassi, and this is the only time you're going to hear Marvels and Degrassi intermingled in the same sentence probably in
Uh,
history. Though that would be
yeah.
that'd be pretty sweet, like the Avengers, but it's Degrassi. But you have your overarching story, then you have the A story, the B story, and the C story, and all these stories come together because of the giant overarching story. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like WWE at that time weren't really perfecting it that much. Like you had Angle Austin, which was a great rivalry, but their rivalry stemmed more from who was Vince McMahon's best friend over than like one trying to put the other company out of business just because of petty reasons.
Yeah. So again, it was literally a Vince McMahon vanity angle. It's
Hmm.
just like, who likes me the most? That's the angle. That'll show 'em.
Ah, hug me, Austin. Ah.
Yeah. And like, again, going back, like another guy, like you had, another good worker in Chris Canyon. You could have brought back the Mortis character.
Yeah. Would have loved to see Mortis in WWE. I think he tried to like post invasion. If I remember correctly, I think he tried like the Mortis character like in a dark match, but I don't think they went for it.
And like, think about it, right? Somebody like a Mortis, you had the Ministry and all that. You'd have fit right in.
Hmm.
You had the Ministry, you had the Brood, all that. You could have easily like tagged with Gangrel.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Gangrel was with the company at the time.
True, but you still
Yeah,
had like Edge and
but yeah, you
Christian. You
still
still had
had like all these
Taker,
other like
Kane. You know.
yeah, you had all these other elements that could have helped promote that character to the main roster. So I think what we were talking about makes a lot of sense, and it would have been better for them to slowly start introducing these WCW guys, not all at once, but periodically, one at a time. You know, some Easter eggs, some teases, and then when you finally get those bigger names out of the Turner contracts, that's when you could start putting into motion once pens to paper with all these bigger guys. That's when you start putting the wheels in motion for this invasion to actually make it mean something of importance. But instead, I think it was just like I said before, let's just get this out there, get it over with. We'll worry about what's coming up next. And then that was a
Yeah.
shame because you had the NWO come in, Rey Mysterio come in, Scott Steiner come in. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
you had all these former WCW guys come in, everyone except for Sting, but Sting was like years and years from that
Yeah.
point. And apparently, the reason why Sting didn't come in during the invasion or didn't really consider it was the promo between The Rock and Booker T, where The Rock said to Booker T, "Who in the blue hell are you?" And
Are
Booker T is like
you?
the
Yeah.
WCW champion, and Sting's like, "Is that how I'm going to be treated like within WWE?"
Mm-hmm.
Because as the story goes, when Sting got to WWE, Vince McMahon said the Road Dogg works behind the scenes in WWE now. Vince asked
Mm-hmm.
him, "Oh, is this Sting guy good?" You know, and it's just it seems really bizarre to say, but the guy was so engrossed in his own product. I'm sure he was aware of talent, but I'm not sure if he would actually sit down and watch like talent's matches, no matter how big of names they were. Like I'm sure he had certain
Mm-hmm.
respect for guys like Ric Flair, um, Hogan when he was in WC. I'm sure he was like aware of what all these talents were doing, but I'm not sure if from a match standpoint or a creative standpoint, he would really know anything about them. I know the story goes like Chris Jericho when he came in, he was a big signing for the company at the time when he jumped from WCW to WWE. But if you remember the first couple of months, Jericho wasn't doing anything of significance.
Yeah.
People talk about his debut being one of the greatest of all time, and it is. But after that, he was teamed up with Mr. Hughes. He was on Sunday Night Heat. He was losing to Gangrel, Steven Richards, Viscera, and they really didn't catch fire with Jericho until months later because
Mm-hmm.
Jericho not only that, but they hadn't even wanted Jericho to learn the WWE system, and that was the biggest thing about this invasion. They really wanted to sanitize all the WCW guys to be more like the WWE guys. And I think that's what kind of stripped it of its interest from the audience at large.
Yeah. And kind of going back to the superhero analogy, like, even if they were under one roof, they could have been very different products. And you can still have crossovers, you can still integrate them. Like, think
Hmm.
about the lightheartedness of Shazam versus like the newer Batman, where they went like detective noir.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to, it's kind of a square peg in a round hole. However, you can still, have little interactions with them, even if it's like you said, like a locker room little thing, like, yo, like, do you know where the talent relation is? And they're just like, wait, is this person gonna get hired? Like,
Hmm.
because they know they're gonna be a draw. So it's like, why not use what you have? Like, why not push this product to be good? And I could, okay, so I get Vince being very engrossed in his own product. I understand it. But also, he has enough people around him to say, these are the ones you should watch because I mean, time and time again, it's always been the tale as old as time that big promotions will poach little promotions' talents.
Hmm.
So it's like you have people that you know will watch because I mean we've seen it time and time again that one person leaves a promotion, goes to another promotion. How do they know? Somebody has to know somewhere. Somebody knows something. They're on someone's radar. Not necessarily Vince, but he could have people around him that could say like, "Hey, like these are people you should watch for."
Hmm. Yeah, and I think he did
And
for a while. I know Jim Ross was the one who was very integral of hiring Mick
hmm
Foley, and Vince famously said, "All right, Jr., I'll hire him, but I'm hiring because I want to see you what happens, and it will break your heart to see when a talent doesn't pan out like you think it would." And Mick Foley, when he heard that in Jim Ross's book, he's like, "I'm a human being. I have feelings and a family, you know."
yeah,
So I think it's again one of those things where the guy is so engrossed in his own product that it's like a baseball player that got signed to the Yankees. It's like, oh, we did this at Tampa Bay. All right, cool. You're in the Yankees now. But either way, you're
yeah,
still hitting the ball. It's still like the same thing you need to do. You're just on a different team, and I think that's what a lot of WCW guys kind of suffered from. Like a lot of people didn't know the transition because you worked in WCW doesn't mean you're going to transition well to WWE, and vice versa, as we've seen with
hmm
some cases with WWE and AEW or AEW and WWE that we're probably going to see more of in the future. Not everyone is going to be hot right out of the gate. And
true.
it, and again, the invasion's a big what if, could have been with all this. And so I'm going to turn it to you, Sir Marcus. I'm going to give you
hmm
three matches. Hypothetically, you have control of the invasion. You get to book three matches, no Time Warner contracts, no talent off limits. We're just going to use what we have. You could use any talent from any time period. Anybody who came over to WWE from WCW. What are your three matches that you're booking and why?
Um, even though there was Jeff and RVD, again, given that they're not big guys, but they are great performers,
Hmm.
I would say a three-way with one of the good cruiserweights
Hmm.
because not only do you have essentially one from each brand, you have one that is not 7 foot, 200 a gazillion pounds, and they can still put on a very good show. They can um still like get the crowd involved. So you have somebody like, and it's funny because I have the WCW roster up right now, and I'm looking. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Ray. I would go Ray, but you could again you could do Psychosis. You could do
You can do
you have
Juventud.
Lance Storm. That could have gave Lance Storm a really good rub right there
Yeah.
because again, great worker, not necessarily the best as far as talking, but yeah, could have gave him a great,
Hmm.
uh, a pretty nice rub. Let's see who else you got. You could have brought in. I mean, like I said before, you had Malenko, who great wrestler, not necessarily great personality wise,
Hmm.
but very good in the ring. Like use
Yeah.
use each other to elevate each other.
Yeah.
I would say that. Let's see
I
here.
think Malenka was transitioning to a producer at the time.
Okay, makes sense.
I think so because he was still in that like. Do you remember the Perry Saturn thing where his gimmick was he he just had
Moppy.
yeah, he just had CTE.
Yep.
Oof, that didn't age well.
That didn't age well. Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Looking at the roster right now, as much as I do like Ray, I'm gonna swap him out Um, put in Elix Skipper,
Ooh, that's a good one.
like Rob Van Dam, Jeff Hardy, Elix Skipper. Whoa!
Yo, Elix Skipper, man, so underrated. Like,
Yeah,
just the legendary cage bump that he did. Do you remember that with the in TNA? He did like the Hurricane Rana. He like tight roped across
yeah.
the
You like
cage.
he type wrote.
Yeah, yeah, and then he just
Yeah,
like Hurricane Rana, and that was one of the craziest things I've seen.
yeah. And it's one of those like again, it's so funny because just like anything, you have your big name guys, but it's one of those like if you know, you know. Like
Hmm.
if you really pay attention to wrestling, then you know hearing those three in a match, your
Hmm.
ears would definitely perk up, especially if you gave them a significant amount of time. Like if you gave them like let's say, like a 15-minute match, that's a decent chunk of the card, but you have three solid workers.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
I think that would be a good one. And I mean, even if you wanna do if you wanna add ECW in the mix, you can make it a fatal four way, and you can throw in like super crazy.
yeah, that's good too. Yeah, yeah, because at the time, Crazy was in ROH a bit with Eddie, because Eddie was doing kind of his comeback tour. And Eddie, I'm not sure if you saw Eddie in 2002, but the dude was just shredded. He was big. And like one of the matches I would do was like Eddie Guerrero, Jeff Hardy, because I think they were like kind of like teasing that feud with the Hardy Boys and Eddie Guerrero before Eddie was
Mm-hmm.
released. And that would have been fantastic. I think the Outsiders with the Dudleys would have been fun.
Ooh,
Yeah, that would have been pretty fun.
that, wow, yeah, that would have been a really good one.
Yeah, and then of course you have again, you have Hulk Hogan and the popular ones like Hulk Hogan, Steve Austin, because that was like one of the dream matches. Undertaker, Sting.
Mm-hmm.
People I know wanted that one for a while.
Yeah, yeah, makes
Uh,
sense.
just a bunch of different possibilities that what could have been. That's why they're called dream matches. And Marcus, I'm not sure if I've told you
True.
this, but I hate the term dream matches of matches that can actually possibly be happening. It's like, oh, this is a
Yeah,
dream match on TV tonight. I'm just like, well, it's not a dream match if I'm seeing it in front of me. Dream matches should
yeah,
just be
yeah,
like in the mind. At least that's my opinion of it, at least.
for sure, for sure. Yeah, and it's one of those things that I think just as people we always want what we can't have,
Hmm.
or we fantasize about different things. Let's see. What would be another one that would be really good? Um, hmm. And it's funny because I have all three rosters like pulled up on my computer, so I can like look and compare. Let's see here. Let's see here. So I'm trying. What I would like is to kind of obviously yes, you have your big names, but I wanted to kind of give your mid and your undercards a bit of a thing, just because like your big names are gonna draw.
Hmm.
Your big names are gonna put butts in seats. But as anybody that's been to a live event, whether it be the big time or whether it be an indie promotion, there's people that you're gonna know, but there's also people that like you leave being a fan of theirs that you
Right.
didn't
Yes.
enter,
Yeah.
and you're just like, yo, like I gotta look this person up
Hmm.
because that match was like amazing, whether it be a one on one or like whatever the stipulations are. But you always find out something that that is very. It's almost kind of like a secret.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Yeah. It's
like
like I didn't know I liked this until I saw it in front of me, and that's what the undercard and the mid card usually is a bunch of times. Because a lot of people nowadays, it's like they'll know like the Roman Reigns, the Cody Rhodes, everybody like that, but they'll leave possibly saying, "Oh, who's this Sami Zayn guy?" or "Who's this Kevin Owens guy?" And then they'll
Yeah.
go down the rabbit hole. It's just like, oh wait, they were Kevin Steen. Oh, and the Sami Zayn guy kind of looks like El Generico, even though they're two completely different people. That looks pretty awesome, you know.
Yeah.
So that's what you got to do. So anyway, Marcus, we're about to wrap up a little bit here.
Okay.
I will give you a chance to grade the entirety of the invasion. From you give it like a passing A all the way to an F triple minus if it was bad. What grade would you give the invasion and why?
Um, I hmm, I honestly give it an F. Like, let's be real here. So much was botched. So much was wasted. You had so many great things that you could have done, and it wasn't it just wasn't done. It
Yeah, it
just
was
wasn't a
wasn't
thing.
realized. Yeah,
Yeah, like you you have all of these people, and again, I get that some of the guys were not there, but you still had so much potential. And it's funny because now that I'm thinking of matches, one that I think would be really good, and it would be comical in a way just because both of these guys are very lighthearted. But think like um Norman Smiley versus Mankind.
ooh, that'd be fun.
Yeah, because you got like Norman Smiley,
Yeah, Mr.
screaming
Sacco
Norman.
versus the Wiggle. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly, so many good things could have came out of this, and it was just ruined. It was just trash.
Yeah.
Like it was so incredibly just black.
Yeah.
Like you could have had something again, I'm looking at the roster here, just like matches that are like some of the odd couples. Like you could have had like Goldust and Shark Boy.
Oh, I would have loved that. I love Shark Boy.
Yeah, like Goldust is a great worker. First of all, Goldust to me is super underrated.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
you had all these people, and you did nothing with them.
Hmm.
You got like out of the 40 to 60 plus people that you had come to your staff, you got maybe what 5 stars out of them.
Probably just Van Dam and Booker,
Yeah,
if I'm really
you could
thinking
you
hard
could
about
I
it.
mean you could say Hurricane. You could
Yeah,
say
Hurricane. Yeah, yeah.
are we counting Jericho?
I mean, Jericho was already like WWF branded at that point.
Okay. But think about it, right? You could have had factions, you could have stables,
Yeah.
you could have had so much from these two companies, and you did nothing with them.
Yeah, and I
You
think
did nothing.
yeah, I think the word you used earlier, just blah. That's my sentiments of the invasion in general. Just like could have been more. If I were to grade it, I'd give it a D, just because Rob Van Dam was probably the highlight, and
Yeah.
then you had Kurt and Steve Austin, but it's like they weren't really. I don't want to say like granted Steve Austin was in WCW, but both of them were like WWE guys.
Mhm.
And you also had like Rock and Jericho was fun.
Mhm.
So, but again, it was just WWE. But if it's like I'm grading certain by just things that were brought by the invasion, it would probably be Van Dam and Hurricane. Those were like the only two that I actually enjoyed that they kind of brought over, and Booker.
Yeah, yeah, like they murdered him and then threw him in the Lazarus pit, and it's like, all right, we like you now. After like they gave him so many terrible, terrible angles, and I mean, again, like
He didn't really
going back
get
to
momentum until Goldust, when WWE.
yeah, yeah,
Though
and like
the supermarket fight was great with Steve Austin. That was
yeah,
fantastic.
the supermarket fight and like the little bingo vignette when they're
Yeah.
with all the old ladies and
The church one too.
yeah,
Yeah.
but like think about some like Misfits in Action versus like Team Holly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Holly
You
cousins. Oh, I love the Holly cousins.
yeah, like you had so many good things. You had, and even some of the some of the goofy angles. You
Yeah.
had like Mike Awesome when he was like the disco guy, and you had Disco Inferno.
Yeah.
Why not put them against the oddities?
Yeah. It's again a lot of options that just weren't fully realized. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's gonna do it for this episode. Marcus, thank you
All right.
for joining me. Where can we follow you if we want the listening audience to follow you?
So I'm not a big social media guy. I do have them. If you reach out and you want to give me some of your shoot takes, if you think my takes are bad and you want to bury them, let me know why.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
you know of all people that I'm a pretty level-headed guy,
Yeah.
and I take things into consideration. But so my IG is QUEZMAV, and I use Snapchat a lot. So if you guys want to come on and nerd out and talk wrestling, dude, I love wrestling. Wrestling, cartoons, battle rap, clothes, food, whatever. Just like SIRMAV. And yeah, man, thank you so much. I'd love to come back. Had a great time, just two nerds just nerding out,
Yeah, man.
having a great time.
Of
But
course, man.
again, thank you.
Yeah, man. You're definitely gonna. You always have an open invite with me on the podcast. Any idea that you want to talk about, we can just come on here. If you want to talk about Mucha Lucha, we can do that too.
I'm about to probably watch the Rey Mysterio cartoon.
Oh, I
Check
heard
that out.
about that one. Tell me how it is, and then I'll nerd out on that with you. We'll come
All
back on
right,
here and
all
we'll
right.
talk about it.
That sounds like a solid plan. I would love to.
All right, sounds good. Again, this has been this episode of Wrestling Retold and Relived with Richie Mars. You can follow us on the Instagram, at the Twitter, and the TikTok at Retold Richie Mars. New episodes every Tuesday. TTFN. Ta ta for now.